Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to another live sessions at the Reactor. My name is Rav and I'm the program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be welcoming. Do ask questions. The chat's going to be open throughout, so please do ask questions. We're back with the second episode of Power BI Everywhere series, and today's session is going to be led by Scott and David. With that, I'm now going to invite David up on the stream, who's going to introduce the session. Hi, David.
Hi, Rav. Thank you for bringing me in. So, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second Power BI series for Power BI Everywhere. And before we talk about what we are going to have today, make sure that you are also in the challenge. We have the challenge. If you want to do the challenge, go to aka.ms/AzureED. That gives you opportunity to do the challenge. We also have vouchers for people who wants to write some exams. So make sure you go into the challenge. Today, we'll be talking more on the Power BI and Dataverse synergy. You understand that Dataverse is a whole lot more than just your data for Power Apps. And we want to see how we're able to analyze, create reports together when you have your data in Dataverse. And it will be my pleasure to invite Scott Sewell. Scott Sewell, hi.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Good morning or good evening from my end, though, from Lagos. So thank you very much for coming in. So Scott is a principal product manager, and majorly his main job is Dataverse. He works Dataverse in and out for the past so many years, and he'll be introducing himself to you. So I welcome Scott. Hi.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. It's an exciting topic, and it's especially great for learners because there's so much you can do with you taking Power BI and working with Dataverse data, and vice versa. People that are experts in Power BI who've launched into expansions of their career using Dataverse and the Power Apps. So it's a fun topic. I'm looking forward to talking about it today.
Yeah, you can have the floor right now.
Well, fantastic. So thanks for the invitation. Like I said, David mentioned my name is Scott Sewell. I'm a principal program manager on the Power BI CAT team. So I do work for Power BI now, but I started out working on the Dataverse side, really beginning with a product called CRM 1.0. This was a customer relationship management database that was used to track small businesses, customers, and their sales opportunities, et cetera. It's very small niche product, but it took off and became more popular. And as it became more popular, different customers said, "Hey, I need to add this kind of field, or I need to add this kind of record to this data, the data that we're tracking about our customers." And so Microsoft added the full capability of being able to expand that product and expand the schema of what you can track into the product itself. And so, but what's funny is it gradually became that the whole layer of being able to track the data and add and manage schema through a UI layer, and being able to manage security and workflow and extensibility with programming, plugins, et cetera. This platform that CRM is built on became larger and larger, even larger than CRM itself. And more customers were using it for things outside of CRM. That's where Microsoft wisely moved it out and became its own platform called Dataverse. There's still Microsoft CRM, but it's just an application that sits on top of Dataverse. But you'll also find like Microsoft Projects is sitting on top of Dataverse. A lot of Power Apps sit on top of Dataverse. So it's out there running a lot of the business applications that you see in organizations that have a Microsoft focus today. And since this is a Power BI oriented group, I thought I'd share a little bit about what does Dataverse look like before we dive a little deeper into it. This is an exciting topic, and my expectations are that as you go through this material and you learn a little bit about it, it really expands the opportunity you have to serve your customers in ways that you're doing now, expanding what you're doing, as well as stepping into additional areas that you can serve the customers or constituents or organizations you're working with. So without any further explanation, this really is Dataverse meets Power BI. And this is the Dataverse logo, and this is Power BI. And today there's kind of this little in between, or actually going back a few years, it was really this really little overlap between the two, where customers who were using Dataverse learned to take advantage of Power BI and just loved it. But it was just it was a kind of an effort to get involved in that. So that's where I stepped in. My role has been to help change the situation from this to this, where there's a lot more love between the two products, and it's a much easier product to take advantage of if you're trying to pull together those and take advantage of it. So let's talk about the value, but first, let me show you what the products look like. So you're already familiar with with Power BI, but let me show you backstage inside of Dataverse. By the way, Dataverse is the platform, but really when you're using Dataverse, you're probably going to go to it through a couple of different ways. Like I said, you might be going through it through Dynamics, or you might be going through connecting to it through a Power App, or you might be using a Dataverse to build a Power App. Very common things that you can do within that. So I'm going into the Power Apps administration area of the Maker portal, and I can go and I can start with the idea of making a Power App based on Dataverse data. And all I'm doing is connecting to Dataverse and saying, once I connect to it, I choose the tables that I want to work with. In this case, these are, out of the box tables like action cards or activities or contacts, etc. There's a few things that are, you'll note, are premium tables, but you can start with that and connect with it and start building an application on top of it to suit whatever you need. Or you could even connect and create your own tables unrelated to anything in Dataverse to start with. It's just that easy and a simple process to go with. Once you've started building it, you get into the situation where now you have tables that you've created, and inside those tables, you'll have attributes, or you'll see columns like the data that's in the columns, those things you would expect in a database. But instead of just being limited to tables and columns like you would expect in a database, it also includes things like forms, where I say, okay, if I'm going to interact with this table, I'd like to see it organized in a form that looks like that I would present to a user, and that user would be able to interact with the data in the database using that form. Take a second to load up here, but we'll see what a form looks like. And you'll notice on the side, I've got all the columns that I could use in the form, as well as the organization of what's on the form. What are the labels that the organization to it? I can include form libraries for JavaScript, etc., as well as even business rules. And they're here on the right is the form editor, where I can go through and start modifying the form, so that at that point, a user has this really nice experience to interact with. And again, I'm doing this really without any code involved. I can look also in the account. I should have pointed this out earlier, but in addition to the forms, we can go and see. Let's see. I can go to account and say, here's my views. Then we have views. Now, you know views in Oracle or SQL or those on a database, but these are really views that you present to a user where they see the data coming from that table or related tables in a list in the application. And again, this is just a really simple way of configuring and making a user interface with the data that we've got in place. And like in this case, I'm now looking at a view, but I'm seeing it inside of Dynamics, but this is just a Dataverse view being displayed to me inside of this app that I have. And inside that app, once I have data in the view, I can start interacting with it by, moving up and, sorting, etc. I can drill into a record and like, here's my account record. I can drill into that. It'll open up the form that I looked at, and I can see details about this particular customer, Fourth Coffee customer. But you'll notice as I highlight these items, I can edit them, but I've also included or embedded in this form a Power BI report. And this Power BI report is taking the record that I'm on and passing it back to a data set. And in that data set, I've filtered it and sent it back and said, I want you to go get me all the data about Fourth Coffee. In this case, got a handful of records. Here's the opportunities that I've closed over time. Here's my closing percentage and how long does it take to close records, et cetera. Just simple ideas that we have in place. But I'm actually taking data that I've pulled out of Dataverse and summarized it with Power BI and added it back to the form in Dataverse so that a user could have a much richer experience with that. In this case, this Fourth Coffee is a pretty simple example, but what we're also seeing is that this data can be data from Dataverse and this application that I've put in place, or it could be data from outside of Dataverse and data that we could see coming from other applications in the organization, like an ERP system or an inventory or a shipping or whatever those types of things could be. I can pull it together and really enrich the value of the report of the record that I'm involved in. Now, it's important to understand because that's an open door to you as a maker to look at the organizations you're working with and saying, okay, what data are they consuming? How can I enrich and how can I make that data more valuable? Or how can I help them take advantage of the data that they have? Because as they take advantage of the data they have, they look to you as being a super valuable resource and helping them really move their business forward. And that's it's an incredible gift and opportunity you have as a maker to be able to make a change and make help businesses move forward and ultimately drive your own career forward as well. Here's an example of the open opportunities that I have in the record, and these are just sales opportunities. And again, these are just a view and going to individual forms of those records that are related. And by the way, I'm looking at a form record here that has attributes or columns on it, but it also has relationships back to other tables, as you would expect in a database. But if I click on this individual record, I'll open up that individual opportunity, which gives me the details about that sales opportunity and different things that are going on with that. Or I can go back and say, instead of opening up an individual opportunity, I can use the hyperlinks and jump to a related record. Like in this case, I could jump, instead of going to the opportunity, I can jump to Amy Adams or Amy Albert, who's the sales user associated with this record. And of course, also embedded in this record, I've got her information as well as Amy's sales guidance from a Power BI report that's been embedded in that form. Really a powerful way to expand the value of these opportunities. One other item I should point out that's been helpful is you'll see more and more these organizations taking advantage of the growing amount of data that they have. Microsoft have embedded a visualize this view button in the form, in the form itself now, or in the view itself now. So you'll see that if I go to a record, and this, by the way, this view has been filtered to open opportunities, or I could look at closed opportunities and refilter it accordingly. Different but I'm going to stick with open opportunities in this case. So I'm going to stick with the open opportunities, and I can take the filter that's been applied to this view, as well as the columns that have been selected for that view, and pass it to a Power BI quick report. This quick report sits inside of, it's a mashup between Dataverse and Power BI that allows you to take a view that you're looking at and turn it into a Power BI report, kind of on the fly. This Power BI report is a quick report. It shows me it shows me the columns that I have in the view that I had, as well as then tries to take a guess at how do I want to summarize that and how do I want to make that available to the user. This is in the product today. There's no licensing or anything involved with being able to use it. It is a temporary report, ephemeral report that as I launch it, I can see the data, I can interact with it, I can click on it, say personalize it. I don't want a bar chart, I want a column chart, and I want to add a legend of, let me go with owners, and I'll group it as such. So once I start doing that, I can interact with this form or this view, excuse me, this quick report. And as I interact with it, I can make some changes. If I close the window, it's gone. The changes I've made are gone, but I can save it to my personal workspace, or I can then, if I have licensing, I can share it out to others and make it available to other people in the organization. But I really point this out to identify that this is a growing opportunity. If in your organizations you'd like to step in and say, hey, I can take this and help you go even further with it. And that's really where we come into Power BI reports that connect to things that are larger and larger data sets. So that really I want to talk to you today more in that perspective of how do I take the data that's sitting in Dataverse, all this kind of business application data, pull it together and take advantage of it using Power BI. Like I said, going back a few years, it was a little awkward. It was kind of a challenge because the connectivity, because it's an application that's being hosted, or it's a software as a service. There, I don't have access directly to the underlying core SQL servers that are running it. I have access to the APIs, and I can connect to them and interact with them and get data from that. But I can't just like jump onto the, telnet into the server that's running this and grab all the data from there. So it made it a little bit difficult at first. But fortunately, we've got some ways that we've got it in place now that it makes it much, much easier. But all that's to say, this thing adds a lot of using Power BI with Dataverse applications. And Dataverse applications are going to be your model-driven Power Apps. There could be the Dynamics 365, sales, service, project service, field service, the customer contact center, all these other things that are sitting on top of Dataverse. All these are really rich sources of which you can pull data in. And by doing that and bringing the Power BI expertise that you have to the Dataverse implementations, you can, again, create the value of the report, add those contextual reports, and increase the adoption and completion of that process. So I'm going to look at a couple of areas. First off, the first one we've touched a little bit about is integration options that we have. In this, we've already seen how we can create a Power BI report, embed it as a dashboard, just kind of overall. We can also go into a form and add it within a form as in an application form and give people the contextual value of that record that we're looking at. We can, there's some new features involved in embedding the dashboard. It used to be a little more convoluted, but now it's actually just part of the Maker app. It's made it much, much nicer. The quick reports are now available. And additionally, if you're not as familiar with the Dataverse side, there's a whole ALM platform portion to the Dataverse piece where I configure a solution or an application, configure the tables and the columns and the report, the things that are in that. I can take all those configurations and package it up as a solution and export that as a zip file, hand it off to somebody with another Dataverse implementation, and they can import those configurations. So it makes it easier to move it from dev to test to pre-prod and prod. You can move it using a zip file to move it along. Up until recently, you weren't able to do the same thing with Power BI in the integrated Power BI reports. Now I can bring a Power BI report into a solution inside of Power Apps, and I can take it, and then as I move it from dev to test to prod, etc., it moves that report with it, and it connects all the dots and makes it work. So it's a very nice enhancement that they've added to it to allow it to bring those solutions together, and you can import the data set and the report and make it available, move it forward. So that's the integration side. Now, the harder part, the more questionable area, is the way, how do I report on the data that's sitting in Dataverse? Now, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, you don't have access. Nobody has access to the raw SQL data server down below. In fact, like I said, David mentioned, I've been doing Dataverse for 20 years. When we started out, I was sitting on the box in a server room, installing it with floppies or CDs later on, installing it with CDs and saying, here's the next CD and next CD. And I would set it up, and I had access to the whole data, the whole stack. And there was the raw tables I could interact with. And I built stuff and used that. And then I had other people who would build stuff, and it was really easy to get those things corrupted. So wisely, they moved all this to where you're interacting with it not from the raw table, but through this AI, this UI layer, and also through an API. It does a couple of things. One, it makes sure that the data you're pulling back is consistent. And number two, it also pulls it back. In one way, it's pulling it back through the security layer that you have. So think about a lot of applications in the case where you have sensitive data and different people in the organization can see different data. Like, for instance, in a sales organization, each salesperson might be only allowed to see the records or the customers that they're working on, but they can't see what their other salespeople are working on. But a sales manager might be able to see all the people on his team and what are they doing. Or she could look at it and say, here's all the teams I'm responsible for. So there's a whole security matrix inside of Dataverse that can be respected using the way that we build the report. So let me talk about those three ways. There's three primary ways. There's another way it's kind of still in preview. I'm going to skip over it, but the three ways that I'm talking about today are two of them use the Dataverse connector, and one of them uses Azure Synapse Link. And the first two using the Dataverse connector, one's using direct query, and the other uses import mode. We'll talk about what those advantages and disadvantages are between those two. When I first started using Dataverse with Power BI with Dataverse, it depended on what I searched for. It would Microsoft documents would come back and say, here's an example of how to do that. And it would just give you one example. And if that example didn't work well for you, you had to know that, maybe there are other ways to do it. There wasn't any guidance to say, here's the direction you can go to say, if you're dealing with 500,000 records, there's a different way to do it versus if you're dealing with, a user's, 1,000 records. If they're dealing with just 1,000 records, these are some options for you. So I want to kind of talk through those processes. The first one is the idea of direct query. And that's where there's really no data sitting inside of Power BI. We're just using that front end and the query so that whenever anybody opens up the report, it says, okay, let me say, it's David asking for the data. Let me go out to Dataverse and ask Dataverse for the data that David is allowed to see, and I'm going to retrieve that and populate the visuals. Or it would look at it and say, that's Scott's asking for the data. I'll go ask for the data that Scott can see. And it might be different data, and it would populate the visuals. But it's only doing that at runtime, at report display. It's not storing any data in Power BI. It's only on the fly. The advantage is that you have that security model preserved. The disadvantage is it's much slower because, again, you don't have the advantage of having it cached over into Power BI. So if you're able to say, okay, I'm not concerned about the people who are going to see this report already have permission to see the data that's in it, so I don't have to worry about like partitioning off the queries, I can use the import mode where I pull the data from Dataverse into the Vertipack engine that sits inside of Power BI. That Vertipack engine is like, you already know it's there. It's like baked inside of Power BI, and I can pull the data in there and have it cached. And then when Power BI, the visuals asks for data, it's locally just going right into the data that's stored inside of Power BI and visualize and displaying that. So it's really, really fast in that sense. So it could be the difference in seconds versus dozens of seconds and the ability to visualize these reports much, much, much faster. And you can pull lots and lots and lots of data into the Dataverse through the Dataverse connector into the environment. Now, I will say there is still a limit when you're importing this data, because when I'm coming through the import mode directly to Dataverse, I'm still going through the API of Dataverse, and there is still, it's still going through several layers before you're not pulling it, you're not reading it raw off the SQL tables. You're pulling it through the API. So there is still some layer of things that are going on in there, which makes it good up to I'm gonna say 100,000 rows. It's probably, I can get decent, much higher. If you do a finely tailored query, I'm getting 300,000 records in, but being very, very particular about what I pull back. So you can do this in this approach, but really when we move into the 500,000, millions of records, multi-million records, this approach of going through the Dataverse connector into Dataverse directly doesn't scale up that direction. It's really not intended to. And that's where we have a third option, which is using the Azure Synapse link for Dataverse. This approach says, let me take all the data from Dataverse, and as people make changes to that data, new records are created or records are deleted or updated, I'm going to take all those changes and push it down into the Azure Data Lake. I'll have a place in the lake. I'm going to push a copy of all those data down into that lake and keep that lake updated. It's currently in CSV files, but it's changing over to Parquet files. And we'll just keep updating that data in the lake and make it available, which in the lake, it's a very high volume, high security place really intended to be able to grab lots and lots and lots of data at scale fairly cheaply even as well. In that case, we're going to take that and move it into and use Azure Synapse Analytics, the serverless SQL on top of it. Say, I'm going to take an application that acts like it's a server, acts like a SQL table, SQL server, but it's going to be, instead of having the databases in SQL tables, it's going to look into the lake at the CSV or Parquet files and pull those out and expose it so that Power BI can import the data from there. So it seems like an extra couple of hops, but in fact, it actually frees it up so that the data doesn't have to be pulled through the Dataverse API every time you want to refresh it. It gets it out in the lake, and once you get in the lake, you can combine it with data from other sources into the lake as well. If you want to take a lakehouse approach and pull all that data together, summarize it, make it available into the Power BI report. So this is really the high volume approach that we recommend. And it doesn't mean that you have to choose only one approach for your whole organization. Like I said, I was working with a large financial services organization, and we built basically looked like the same report. On one level, on the report that was tied to a certain audience, the audience that had very limited vision into what they could see, we used a direct query approach because we wanted to preserve that security model from Dataverse and have that showing up inside of this report. But then on the other hand, we had some C-level executives that already had permission to see all of this data. And they need to see vast amounts across the enterprise. For those users, we built a almost identical report, except the back end of that report was pulling through Synapse Analytics and really served the best of both to the different audiences and for the different purposes of those reports. So just keeping in mind that you have some choices is really important, because all the time you're going to have different types of use cases, and the same hammer that is really great for one case, you've got some options because every use case is going to be slightly different, which is fun. That makes it interesting. I want to take another step forward and look at some guidance documentation that talks about once we've got the two ideas in terms of connectivity, there is some guidance in terms of what are some best cases or use cases that I want to be aware of as a Dataverse, as a Power BI person working on Dataverse, or especially if you're a Power BI expert and you're going to sit down and talk to somebody from the Dataverse perspective, and you're going to help coach them through or help them learn how to use Power BI. There are some things that you're going to want to be able to teach them and help them so that they can have a much better, you can have a much better, more productive project than if you just said, if you didn't have these conversations. The first thing is we have the ability, the inside of Power BI, you can go to the Dataverse connector and point to the Dataverse environment. And this is using that direct query or import mode approach that I mentioned earlier on. But the way it presents it to you is it gives you, it's right there in place, and it will actually give you like all the columns. It's not really a good idea to grab all columns because a basic out of the box Dataverse account table will have several hundred columns by the time you get all the expansions in there. So it can turn into more than what you would like to see. This is an opportunity to step in and say, let's take a look and let's try optimally. The Dataverse connector does allow me to write a sort of a constrained version of SQL, and it will take, even though, like I said, you don't have access to the raw tables underneath, I can pass a query to Dataverse that's structured like a SQL statement, and it will take it, interpret it, run it through the security profile, and pass it and get the data for you and return it to you using what we call the TDS endpoint, the tabular data stream connection for that. Again, that is still the Dataverse connection, but I can connect to it using SQL, sending a SQL language. Now, it's read only, number one. And number two, there are some things that some types of SQL statements that I can't use, but by and large, I can use almost every SQL statement I can think of to pull data from Dataverse through that Dataverse connector into Power BI. So that's a really useful approach to have. This is not news to anybody on the call, but be careful to help the user stay focused on the use case, because a lot of organizations will have sales and service and project services and things. And the tendency is users will come to you and say, I need a report that solves everything everywhere all at once. Not a good use case. So think about that when you're talking to the user, because they can from a Dataverse perspective, the Dataverse people can continue adding things to the same schema and extending that schema into all kinds of different areas, which Dataverse does happily and does really well. But if you try to take that entire schema and pulling it into Power BI, the performance challenges that creates. So you want to think about helping them work through the idea of a use case. Also, the star schema. I can't tell you how many times I tried to take a Dataverse schema, which is a relational model, and try to just pick that up and shove it in Power BI. And that doesn't work at all. It's no good. What you want to do is, as there's no use in taking the same model that sits in Dataverse and pulling it in Power BI. You want to reorganize that into the star schema, the star model. I've usually demonstrate this to, when I'm talking with Dataverse professionals, kind of helping them understand a little bit about what we mean when we talk about star and the fact tables and dimension tables. But you'll want to do that when you're working with somebody from the Dataverse side, and you can help them improve the performance and the usage of their models by just walking them through and helping them get to a star schema. Additionally, query columns, the more columns you ask for out of Dataverse, the longer it takes to transfer that data across the TDS connector to you. By default, if I ask for the account table, it's going to ask for every column in that account table. What you really want to do is help the user start with, what are the minimum required columns that I need? Because every column you add to that adds to the performance overhead of the report. So being very thoughtful of that. And this is the only reason I call this out is because this is a really, really common problem that as I'm working with customers, I can help them solve this, make their performance much faster just by helping them by unselecting all columns and choosing just the columns that they're interested in. Query editor, really helpful. You can get some things out of that. There are some hints that are available. If I'm using the common data service connector and I pass in, I say, here's my environment. Hopefully you can see my, let me do this. Let me zoom in a little bit. Hopefully that zooms. If I'm using the common data service connector, which allows me to pass a SQL statement over to it, there's the environment that I'm passing it to. I want to add in this, over that, create navigation properties equals false. If I do that, that helps reduce the amount of things that are going on inside a Dataverse when it sends it over. That's just a hint that says, I don't really need all the extra metadata that you have. So adding that is not really well documented, but I'm sharing it here, and I've also got it in the documentation now added to it. But also, if you're passing a SQL statement, let me zoom in on this one. If, like, for instance, in this case, I'm passing in here's the connector, and then I'm passing in a select statement here. At the end of it, when I finish that off, I'll add a null, comma, enable folding equals true. What that will allow you to do is it allows Power BI to send over the query to Dataverse, and Dataverse will take care of all the filtering and even some of the aggregations inside of the data, inside the server there, and return to you a clean data set with just the information you need. I have an example what I've been using where I was trying to pull over 500,000 records, and if I tried to do import or direct query and pull the whole thing over, that table was too large for me to pull across the connector. But when I ask for the counts and the sums and the various averages off those metrics off the fact table, and said, I'm going to filter by this customer or this territory, but I ask for just these aggregation values off the fact table, all of this could fold over and it would only return to me the answers, which made it much, much faster. And it also allowed me to query much larger data sets than I could have queried if I was trying to pull all the data into Power BI before I then aggregated it as far. So anyway, being aware of that, taking advantage of those hints. And again, those are documented in the document that I'll share with you. Another one's very common. Dataverse has lots of text in it. Not really useful for a Power BI report. Be aware that you can help customers identify the things that are real facts, that are facts and dimensions that they want to measure by, but to leave the blobs of text back in Dataverse and do that. There's a choice label thing. It's not as often as useful, but also thinking about using dual mode dimension tables if you're using direct query. And finally, like I said, mention the enable folding, making sure that the query folds. That's good. And finally, if you publish it up to a service, if you want that report to be filtered according to the user who's reporting on it, so that when I see the report, it only has the records that I'm allowed to see. And when David opens it up, David only sees the records he's allowed to see. Make sure you check the yellow checkbox for using the user's credential on it. So really important to do that. So very straightforward items to be aware of. And in the documentation, I'll give you a link to the documentation. There's more there available to you. I want to make sure that I move to one other area that's really important. And for that, I want to switch over to, here's an example report. Let's see if I can get that over here. Yeah. So here's a simple report pulling off the case table. But I want to point out to you, when I go into the model area, the basic idea of the star schema that you want to use for that. This one's I was testing a specific item there that's kind of irrelevant here. But a couple of things you'll be aware of is you probably will have on any record multiple dates that you'll want to filter by. Like in this case, on a service case, what day was it created? What day was it closed? And being able to surface that information and using the multiple relationships to your date table is going to be important to use that. And by the way, this is completely off topic, but useful. I do love the Bravo tool from I think was Marcos or on the call yesterday, but the Bravo tool is so useful to build a date table for me, and I can use the data that's inside of Dataverse to tell it what was the start and what's the end, etc. And building that out, so incredibly useful. But that's the way I build my date tables now. I've given up trying to build my own custom date tables. I just use their tool to build the date tables. Being aware of that, making this available to me, and then once I have that, I can make the queries can be very, very responsive and be able to interact with that with no problem. Same thing as when I refresh the data, I'll go and refresh it and straightforward. Show you what those queries look like though. Let's go to transform data. Yep. So let me transform data and bring this query table. It's kind of, I reduced the size of my screen a little bit so that everybody could see it. Now all my windows show up off screen there, but we'll get that out there. Okay. So here is my data coming back from my case table. And if you'll notice when I go to Advanced Editor, you can see some of the things that I've already pointed out as this is, my SQL table that's right in the SQL query right in the middle of it. And in this case, I'm using the SQL connector. And again, I use the SQL connector and talk to Dataverse, or I could use the common data service connector. Same thing. It's actually using exactly under the hood. They're the same thing. Just happens to have an extra attribute here or there. But I have added the enable folding button down here. But you'll notice that I'm pulling in the data and I'm filtering it down here. Let me zoom in on that so you can see that a little bit better. All right. So my incident table those are my service cases, but I'm joining it where there are certain status code, which is cool. But now I'm filtering it where the created on date is greater than a certain date. And what I'll find is, especially in organizations that have a lot of history, their day-to-day reports typically I only need to see what's happening this month or this year over last year, month over month, quarter over quarter, that type of thing. But Dataverse can have years and years and years of history. One of your tricks will be to go ahead and make sure you filter things according to some sort of a date range and say, depending on what the report's use case is, make sure you're only returning data that is within range of what the user would normally be looking at. You can add some extra data for an extra month or two for some cushion, but in this case, I'm saying I'm starting with where the created on date is greater than a certain number of months of history. So in this case, I say 13 negative 13 is greater than 13 months ago. I'll send it right back and say, grab me all that data. And so that will, again, is a performance, an important performance tip for data coming from Dataverse into Power BI. Filter those data sets so that you have a much tighter set of required data. Be careful not to just go shotgun it and grab all the data you got and then figure it out later. Be surgical and grab just the data you're interested in. Additionally, now I know the audience, and especially starting from London, people that are in Central Europe and Africa, your date time zones are very close to the GMT standard where the data is stored, and so it's not as big an issue for you. But if you're working with someone in the States or in Southeast Asia that's further, or Australia that's further away from the date time zone or the GMT, you want to be aware that what they see on screen is adjusted to their time zone, but what's stored in the database is actually GMT. And what's available through the endpoint and through Synapse Link and everything else is going to be the GMT raw data, the raw time zone, and you will need to be responsible for shifting it to show them their time zone. What is that important? Think about if somebody in the US in Seattle creates a record at 5 p.m. on the last day of the year, and they won a sale that happens at the end of the year, and they got it right in on the deadline, and stored it at 5 p.m. at their time. And it's December 31st, 5 p.m. December 31st on their record, and that's what they see. But what's stored in the database is actually 8 hours ahead of that, 8 hours, before that. So that, or after that, I should say, I guess it's backwards. So that would actually show up as January 1st in the database, because it's at 5 p.m. in Seattle. It's actually 3 or 4 in the morning in London or at GMT. So be aware you'll have to shift date times to the user's expected, so that when I show a report, a sales record that the user closed in Seattle at 5 p.m., I'll open it up. I don't want to show it as January 1st the next day, just because I didn't bother to shift the GMT time zone. So that's an important piece to be aware of. And you'll see me doing that here. I have a GMT offset, and I just add that to the date, and then I change it back to a date time. Or a date. Anyway, very, very easy to do, very important to be aware of. But once you've got those in place, you've got a really strong product that you can bring together Power BI with Dataverse. Let me show you one final example. And this is an example where I've pulled all these items together. And in this case, this is another data set. And this is, again, all sample data, of course. But once I have the data coming from Dataverse and pulled into the dashboard, I can start interacting with it. Of course, I can do things like I can drill through to a salesperson record, and I can see in that salesperson what they're working on. But I can also click here. I can use hyperlinks from within Power BI, and those Power BI records can then take me to the corresponding record for that user. In this case, I could right click and I can click on that record, and it will open up a new blank tab, and it will take me to the user record inside of Dynamics so that I can take more action on it. It's going to show me the report in here as well. So we'll see that load up. But again, it's that idea that you build the connections between the two products so that it becomes seamless. Or if I'm looking here and I say, what's in the closing stage here? And we'll see that. And there is my Heller and Son. I can click on that and take advantage of jumping to that record. So really a nice way of getting those two products together and making it available to be able to interact with. I'm going to go ahead and pause at this point because I want to see if there's any questions or comments. And I do, before I get away from that, let me show you one other thing. Oh, I almost forgot. Let me go to, here it is. Pull this over here. Very important. This is a document I want to point out to you. And I think David will be able to share a link to it. But there is a Power BI modeling guidance for the Power BI platform. And you can see the data in here. And it goes through a lot of the tips that I have, and it goes into deeper detail about that, as well as relates to other parts of the documentation. But this is really specifically tailored to people who are writing Power BI reports against a Dataverse background. Also, if you want to take an example of one of these Power BI reports and try it out and explore it, in fact, the report that I just showed you, the sales report, I've put it up on GitHub. You can download it from here and explore it and take advantage of it, change it, do whatever you want to, use it in production. It's all used. It's open source for you. And I've got the reports here for customer sales, the owner and the all the pieces there. Take advantage of it. It's even set up as a solution. You can import it into an environment, try it out, and use it as an example. If you wanted to try to get funding for you to help a customer with Power BI, this might be a way of demonstrating what you can do with that. So those are available to you. So those two items will be really important to be aware of. And anyway, let me check here for David if you're available. Let me see. There's a question: is license management? I'm really not a in license management project. I have tried HTTP connector, Dataverse showing an error. Yeah, using the connector would follow the information here in this, and that should get you there. The only guidance, the only challenge I've had has been inside of organizations, if they have the port 1433 blocked down, or they're using some sort of a heavy proxy, if they're using some heavy proxying, sometimes there's a little challenge to get from the desktop in that organization to Dynamics, which is sitting in the Microsoft cloud. But that's really only in super locked down organizations, but that's possible. But take a look at the guidance there, and really happy to be a part of this. So you see the reactor documentation. There's a connector, and this is available afterwards. So David, I want to pause at this point and see if there's anything else you needed me to cover before we step away. And let me show you. Yeah, there's the resources
Yeah.
available to us.
Okay. Thank you very much. So you've answered the question and other questions. Yes, definitely. The video will be live. You can always watch it every time that you need to watch it. It's a very, very good presentation. I love the four ways in which you can connect between Dataverse and also the Power BI. I wanted to ask a question on the import and the direct queries.
Mhm.
Uh, if you think so, my question, I want to rephrase it very well so that every other person can understand. If you want to work on your performance management when it comes to the Power BI, the loading time, the
Mhm.
execution time, what do you think is better for? Is it import or is it direct query?
So both of them, both cases, the amount of time it takes to get from Dataverse into Power BI is the same. But that's a caveat, because one of them, it's happening behind the scenes and it's preloading the data so that the user, when they open the report, the data is already there for them. On the other hand, if I use direct query, there's no data in the report until the user opens the report, and then it goes and asks for the data. So from a user's perspective, the import mode is lightning fast because the data is already cached for them. From the perspective of the connectivity, it's the same amount of time it takes to get the data from Dataverse over to Power BI. One of it is just whether you're preloading it so the user has cache data, or whether you're waiting for the user to open the report and then and only then going and asking for the data.
Ah, cool, cool. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so that is my question, majorly. Thank you
And
very much.
and the other caveat to that is, in both cases, using some of those tips that I showed you in the step and also in the documentation, using some of those steps or in those tricks will help you by narrowing the width of the queries you ask for, by only asking for the columns you're interested in, and also by narrowing the depth of it by only asking for the records for the last 6 months or the last quarter, whatever you're using, instead of saying just give me everything. That also improves the performance on both cases. So using that width and the depth is going to be an important touchstone to make sure that you're getting the optimal queries.
Yeah. So another good question is how many rows Dataverse that you can store within the Dataverse when it comes to scalability?
I have Dataverse environments that have multiple millions of rows per table.
Wow. Okay. Good. So what I asked that question is for people who wants to do some projects that has to do with scalability, and they want to know how many rows that they
Right.
can store within Dataverse and
Yeah.
to be able to analyze them easily.
Yeah. Now, I'll say that there are some kinds of data, like you think of IoT streaming data or something that's just being auto generated by some process that's creating, you know, hundreds of thousands of rows per day. That's probably something you want to write to a raw table instead of writing it into Dataverse. Think of writing into Dataverse something you want to write to where a person's going to be interacting with those records directly, as
Yeah.
opposed to something where I'm writing like IoT signals or something automated that's just generating log data, high volume, high speed log data that no one is going to be interacting with individual records in general. They're not going to be going after and saying, I want this one record out of the 300,000 that were created yesterday. And I'll
Oh,
ignore all 299,000 other ones. That's type of data that's probably better suited for other storage locations. But things where I'm getting all these opportunities and emails and conversations and storage and those types of stories that are going on in these business applications, Dataverse is a fantastic way to do that. And these power apps really expose that.
yeah. Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope everybody were able to learn something. So thank you very much. Make sure that you try and go for the challenge also. You will see the aka.ms/Azure ED for you to do your Power BI everywhere challenge. You can win vouchers for your exams, especially that is connected to the data platform exams, DP exams. So make sure that you try and do your challenge. Also, is that you register before you do your challenge on the aka.ms/Azure ED reg for you to do it. So I hope you've learned something on Dataverse and Power BI, the connectivity, the scalability, and everything in between. Next week, Monday, our next show is going to be on Power BI and the composite model within Power BI, and that will be the person of Marco Russo, and that will be a very fantastic session for you to be in because any question on DAX, Power BI, Marco Russo will be there to answer those questions. So see you next week. Thank you. Bye.